So just a little intro. Again, my name's Aaron Ingram. I'm the Director of Operations at PreVeteran and really happy to be here today just to share some information with you to hopefully provide insight and help as you get ready for your military transition. So that's who I am. And my background is that I'm a Navy veteran. I spent 10 years flying the P-8 Poseidon and was looking at my own career transition at the 10-year mark when I was getting ready to get out. And I actually became a pre-veteran student before I joined on this side of the fence. So I can speak to the student experience and what it's like to go through a pre-veteran course, what the whole system is about, and how it helped me, which kind of the top line is that I ended up getting a job in commercial real estate um, while I was still on terminal leave, and I negotiated a higher salary. But there was a lot of detail and exploration in that, and how I landed on that, coming from a Navy pilot background. So we'll get into that a little bit, but please stop me, ask your questions as we go along. All right, and then we're going to have a quiz in here, and I'm going to post that in the comments. And in fact, I'll do that right now. And that's just kind of to baseline us on some interesting questions that you may not have been thinking about as you're going through this military transition process. And it may inform you about some things that you possibly didn't consider before. So it's always good to go through that and just get a check on where you're at. And we'll go over the results that we've gotten from over 300 folks doing that very same quiz and talk about what trends we're seeing and why we at PreVeteran think we're seeing those trends. All right, so let's get after it. Kind of already introduced myself a little bit. We'll get a little more into the detail of my background and experience getting out of the military, but I'd really like to focus on talking about the military transition environment today and the choices you have as you go through the process of getting out of the military, because it is a very complex environment and there's a lot to think about. So we'll kind of continue on here. And looking at this slide, this is how we at PreVeteran are very different from most of the folks you see out there who are helping veterans and serving veterans in the space. There's a lot of great work being done out there, and a lot of folks who specifically hone in on the military transition and employment. And we join them in saying that this is a very important aspect of your military transition. What we look at, though, is that we want to show you the challenges you're going to face up front. And we want to show you that reality in the beginning so that you can start thinking about those challenges, addressing those challenges, and have the tools and framework to actually do that successfully. And once you kind of remove a lot of those barriers, you can do a lot of transformational work that gets you well down the road on your military transition journey, and really will serve you well in a lot of other ways outside of just employment. But we know employment has a lot of ripple effects throughout the rest of your transition when it comes to well-being and just how everything goes in general. So looking at this, we see that there are two very different systems. And when we talk about outlining the issues that are out there and bringing them to your attention, we just point out that the military ecosystem is extremely different than the private sector. The two environments are extremely different because their very nature, their existence, and how they operate and are organized is completely and fundamentally different. That's just a fact, and hopefully that's something that you've thought about as you get ready for your transition, that, hey, I'm going into a brand new environment that maybe I don't fully understand. So although you're intelligent, capable, and trained, and you have a vast amount of experience and a lot to offer, a lot of potential, in other words, until you contextualize your background and experience inside of that new environment, you're actually going to end up with a lot of barriers to your success that are going to hold you back from being optimized. And we use that word a lot, optimized. And when we say that, we talk about avoiding underemployment. We want you to be fully employed in a role that is a good fit for you, that you actually desire to do. and that you're compensated well for it. Because there are some stats out there that show veterans struggle the most, right after their transition. And some of those you see right here, it's a little bit blotted out, but veterans leave their first job, over 50% leave their first job within 12 months after their military transition. So this is kind of a symptom of a broader problem that we'll talk about in a little bit. 9 to 18 months to get up to speed. Yeah, folks who don't go through any kind of training and they find themselves in employment after the military, we hear this again and again, that they don't really want to tell their job. They don't want to tell their boss within their job that they don't know what they're doing necessarily, that they don't fully understand the job role. And by the time they figure it out for themselves, that takes 9 to 18 months, which is a major inefficiency at the company level. And so if you look at us as a group, it's a bad business case actually for companies to hire us. And that's not a good message to have out there. And it's not a good reality for veterans who are getting out of the military, because if an employer is looking at these stats that I'm showing up on the screen right now, they're saying, why would I hire this person? Well, we're here to tell you that this doesn't have to be the case, that we can change this dynamic, but we do need to confront the issue face first, really face the issue and address it based on the reality that we're seeing right now. Because as most of you will know, if we don't change anything, nothing is going to change. So if we use the same approach that we've used for the last 30, 40 years, we're going to get the same results. So that's why PreVeteran takes a totally different look at the market. And we want you to understand that these systems are very different. And understanding that in itself is going to go a long way in helping you address the predictable gaps that you're going to have coming out of the military, going into the private sector. And once you understand that those gaps exist, you can actually begin addressing them. And then it's no big deal. Then you can actually have a set of tools and a framework to contextualize your background and experience. And then you can begin speaking the language, communicating with folks outside of the military, which is a significant challenge for many folks. So we're going to post now the link to the quiz. So that's been in the chat here. So go ahead and click on that link, go through the quiz, and we'll go over the results in just a minute here. So as folks are jumping on this live, just ask that they go click on this link. It's a super quick little quiz. It takes about 3 minutes to complete. And I'll hang out here while everyone's finishing that. And then I'll go over some of the results that we see on this quiz from hundreds of folks who have taken it. And there's some very deliberate questions in there that you'll notice are a little different maybe than what you're used to. And they get to the heart of what we're talking about when we see these two different environments. We see some of these negative outcomes and these struggles specifically in the 2 years after military transition. And we have a very clear way forward in addressing those issues and actually getting to a level where we're preventing those issues in the active duty population. So there's a way to better prepare us and a way to actually optimize us before we get out of the military. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So as folks finish up that quiz, I'm going to flash up the results that we see from this quiz. And this is, again, over 300 folks have taken this. So overwhelmingly, we see people that are married and have kids who are most interested in doing something like this and investing in their transition because they see that there's a real problem set that they're going to have to address. And we know that there is some uncertainty deep down that they're feeling, and they feel like they need to do something outside of the normal TAP process, outside of the advice they've been given by peers. They feel like there's something they're missing. They just don't know what it is. And it's a good intuition, and it's why we see a lot of folks that are married and have kids joining us in our courses. So we have kind of people from all branches joining us. And then which sector do you see yourself working? A lot of people are not quite sure yet because they haven't quite done that exploration. And then a big part of that too is that not everyone necessarily understands the differences between the public sector and the private sector and what we're talking about when we define those. So the overwhelming majority of folks actually will go into the private sector for employment after the military. And that's significant because it outlines the differences that we're going to talk about today. So, this is a really significant question. Take a moment to think about your post military employment success. Can you see a clear path forward from where you are now to a successful outcome? 44% say yes, and about 56% say no. And that's kind of a scary result if you really zoom out and look at it, that you're completely changing everything you know in going into a private sector environment that you don't quite understand, and you're not seeing a clear path to success in doing that. And obviously, if you're married and you have kids and you're the primary earner for your family, that's taking on a lot of risk for you and your family if you do have that high level of uncertainty and then you're getting out of the military without a deliberate plan and without addressing some of the gaps that we just mentioned from the start here. So these are common questions too that we go through with folks. What thoughts are entering your mind as you're going through the thought process of your military transition? And we see overwhelmingly that people are thinking about, should I do something different? Do I need another degree or certification? And there's a lot of folks that are getting their PMP. I know we see that every day. Do I need my Six Sigma? Overwhelmingly, most of these thoughts are going through folks' heads. And then we get this common advice, right? We see it out there on social media, and then people we talk to, like, hey, you need to build a network. You need to find a mentor, do informational interviews. And most people are aware of this and are doing some of these activities. But we like to take it a step further and ask the important question of, if you actually connect with someone who's willing to talk to you and mentor you potentially, or it could be a future employer, once you get on a call with them, do you actually know what questions to ask them? And overwhelmingly, we see sort of or not really. So those are not very good answers, right? In the context of, this person could be potentially someone who connects you with a job, could be your boss, or could be someone who guides you through some really important career decisions, and you have no idea what to ask them. And so that's the next layer deep that most people don't realize they need to actually think through before engaging in that process. So, how confident you in your approach and your post-military success? How confident you are that your current approach is going to yield post-military success? 50% of folks, the majority says 50-50 that I'm going to succeed. And the next highest answer is that 70%. So most folks are saying, hey, flip of a coin or less, if you add up this 39% and then the 20 and 10% here, you see that there's an overwhelming majority that say 50% or less chance that I'm going to have a successful outcome based on what I'm doing right now. So to us, that's a little bit frightening because obviously a lot's depending on your transition, and we want everyone to be happy and healthy and really have good outcomes with their employment and holistically with their families and with their financial status and every aspect of their transition. We want to see great success. And right now, there's an awareness of folks who are transitioning out that what they're doing right now, including the mandatory programming that the military provides, is not going to actually set them up for success. And we're going to get into some detail on why that's happening. So there we go. We just went over some of those results. Now, we're talking about employment today, and we're talking about preparing for employment in the private sector specifically. We understand that you may be set on another option, but at PreVeteran, we like to advocate that at least consider the private sector options that exist out there. Because I think once you explore those options, you'll see that those are real possibilities for you as a military individual. and we'll kind of show you the roadmap there. And then if you choose to still go into government or contracting employment or anything outside of the private sector, that's totally understandable. But at least give yourself the option that there are a number of choices out there. And before you shut off, one opportunity, you really need to explore that and see if it could be the right fit for you. So moving on here, on to the employment-related gaps that I outlined a little bit from the onset. We have our two very different environments. We have the military environment and we have the private sector environment. Over the last 2 years and over 7 years of research we've done at PreVeteran, we've identified down to a very specific 3 gaps that we see are most common in military folks as they're getting ready to depart the military. And we know this because Jason and I are both military veterans ourselves who have worked in industry. Jason was at Collins Aerospace for almost a decade, anywhere from entry level to he worked his way up into the executive level. And then for me, working in the commercial real estate industry, we understand these things are real and we've experienced them. And every veteran who's been out for more than a couple of years who we've spoken to has experienced these same gaps. So we're here to talk to you about them today because we feel like if we get it out there in the open, we can address it and we can begin making progress on some of those stats that I showed you earlier. So those 3 gaps that we outline at PreVeteran are the communication gap, the mindset and decision-making gap, and the private sector alignment gap. And let me just expand on those a little bit. So when I talk about the communication gap, we're talking about integrating key technologies for employment. And we're talking about reaching out to subject matter experts, conducting yourself and coming across professionally, and understanding how that actually looks in the private sector environment. So we've had a lot of folks in our course emphasize that they actually had profiles on all these social platforms, LinkedIn, they had a Zoom, they had all these tools, but they didn't know how to actually integrate them together, and they specifically didn't know how to use them towards employment. And going back to our quiz and the results, even if you do, you don't necessarily know what questions to ask. So in this communication gap, in our course, we do offer a course at PreVeteran, and we'll get to that towards the end of this. We address these communication gaps very specifically in a methodical way so that you can fill those gaps and that you can actually come across as a very honed and professional individual who understands the private sector, and you can have positive interactions with future employers or subject matter experts who you want to interview. So the next one is huge, the mindset and decision-making gap. So there's a lot of things that go into this, and this is kind of the bread and butter of what we do at PreVeteran, is that we are a cognitive neuroscience-based company. And that's all to say that we use a brain model to understand how your brain actually operates in the background, and we apply that to the military transition in a way that's very unique. And what our goal and aim is through that programming is to get you to take a step back from thoughts that are just going to pop into your head automatically. And it's really a productive exercise once you practice it a few times and iterate, because you'll start noticing that you have these thoughts that result in unproductive activities. And we'll get a little more into that later. But when you're going from one environment to another very different environment, it makes sense that you may have to think a little bit differently in order to succeed in the new environment. And it's a little bit funny because people will fight us on that. But we do it in the military, right? Whenever we're going on a deployment somewhere or we're going somewhere unfamiliar, that we have this training that we do specifically for the environment we're going into. And we spend a lot of time emphasizing this new environment, understanding the new environment, so that when we're in that new environment, we can actually make good decisions. We can understand where we're at, have an awareness, and it makes us more effective or optimized. So the same thing applies when you're departing the military and going into the private sector. And then we talk about the private sector alignment gap, and this is where that thinking can affect how you see particular things, and it could affect how you actually understand the private sector. So the private sector alignment gap is not quite understanding how the private sector makes money, how your specific role aids in the company's profit-making enterprise, not understanding how companies are organized very deliberately, and not understanding the specificity that goes into a role in the private sector. So what we have folks do out of our 5-week virtual course, our goal is to have them identify what they desire to do down to the industry, company, role, and level. And getting down to that level of specificity, which is extremely helpful in order to contextualize how to succeed in getting that role. So we have you really hone in on that, and we have an entire framework to have you iterate and go through different options, different career options that are available to you, and start finding out what is the best fit for you. A very important question that most people don't spend enough time kind of thinking about as they're getting out of the military, but a very big question. So we find that we actually have to do this training in a very methodical way, that we need to do the communication gap first so that you can use technology for employment and come across professionally, and also understand the nuance to communication outside of the military. We have to do the mindset and decision-making gap next, because we need to disarm your mindset a little bit and get you to take a step back and have a higher level of self-awareness as you're looking at your transition and going into a new environment. And then we teach you about the private sector in the very nuanced ways that it operates, how it's organized, how programs make money, how roles fit into those programs in the profit-making enterprise, and have you understand the various business units within the company. So within this, there's a whole lot going on, but we find we have to do it in this specific order in order to have maximum effect. So this is what we do. So this is the challenge, right? That typically you have an employment window, and a lot of folks coming out of the military don't even understand this fully. Because they'll be looking for jobs a year or more out. I know I was guilty of that. I literally applied to jobs 7-8 months before I was out of the military, not understanding this fact that there is an employment window, which is about 3 to 4 months prior to you getting out. Now that red line, that could be your military transition, or that could be your terminal leave date, depending on how you're looking at it. So within that employment window, you could either do a skill bridge, which has become a very popular thing and is a topic for another day. But that's typically when you're going to be applying to jobs and can actually field interviews and accept a job offer, would be within this window. And this is when companies are looking to actually fill roles. So when you see a job advertised, it's typically because they need someone within that role in the next 4 months. And more often than not, that is the case. And so it's good to just build an awareness about this as a military member. So within our name, PreVeteran, hopefully it's obvious that we focus earlier in the process. What work can you do before your employment window to try to guarantee your success when you depart the military? And how can you be more successful in the interview process, the application process, and throughout? We see posts over and over that I submitted hundreds of applications, I got no responses. I had to go through this many different submissions and I got no response. It wasn't until a year later that I finally got the job. These are not good outcomes, and this is what we want to avoid for specifically veterans who are transitioning out of the military. So what we do is transformational work 1 to 3 years before you get out of the military. And we want to destigmatize the whole space. And we don't want you to have to raise the white flag and say, hey, I'm getting out, and then have everyone look at you differently within your unit. We want this to be considered another part of your professional development while you're serving in the military. So during the course of your career, you do a lot of courses, you do a lot of training. It just makes sense that you could do a training like ours at PreVeteran, understand, have a new set of tools for private sector employment for once you leave the military, which everyone does, 100% of people will leave the military. So to have these tools is only going to benefit you, and it's going to make you a better leader and better able to counsel your soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine as they're departing, so that you can bring that information to them. So we are very much left of this process, but this employment window, that's typically when you're going to see TAP done as well. But we want to be left of all of that and do the early transformational work that we know is extremely important to your post-military success. So this is what we look at when we're talking about the current model and some of the flaws in the current model. That typically you have a long period of military service, whether that's 4 years or 40 years. You have a small sliver of individual development at the end, typically done within the last year. If you're retiring, they'll allow you to do that up to 2 years early. But this is when you can go through TAP and when you can start thinking about your transition and doing some of these activities. The problem that no one really points out is that in that small sliver window of time, you're going to be doing 3 times your normal workload. And what that looks like is you're doing your normal activities. So you have training, you have your deployments, you have your regular job that you're doing, and then meeting your family obligations. Now, on top of that, as you get ready to get out of the military, you're doing all this admin work that you have to do, medical dental appointments, figuring out and squaring away your finances, probably planning a final PCS, VA claim, out processing. A lot goes into that, and it eats up a lot of that time window within that last 12 months. Now, the thing we know people don't spend enough time on, because they're busy doing this first and second activity, this third activity of who am I? What do I want to do next? Finding a mentor, networking, and doing interviews and crafting a resume, those things can be very overwhelming. And so we know a lot of people kind of shove it to the side, wait until the last second and try to figure those out. And predictably, the result of that is a lot of people end up going to a skill bridge thinking that's going to solve all their issues, or going to the 9/11 GI Bill, just I'm going to get my BAH, pursue a degree, and that's going to buy me time to figure out what's next. Now, we see that as a little bit of a broken way of looking at it, because in the best case, you're just kicking the can down the road. And in the worst case, you're setting yourself up for a not very good outcome. So this is the current model, and we're not here to beat up TAP because they're doing huge volume. I mean, over 160,000 people a year is a significant challenge with the resources they have. And so it's not surprising that it's difficult to have transformational work done in a single week when you've done such a long time in the military. But this is the current model, and we do criticize the model that's been developed that you see here. And so when we talk about each of these things, there are a bunch of line items that go into each one. One line item is employment. We're talking about that and focusing on that today. VA claims another one, insurance, finances. These are all line items that you have to get right. You have to try to navigate correctly and optimize in order to, as you see on the right side, kind of get the money that that you should be. And so in order to optimize your employment and not be underemployed, you have to very methodically explore your options, understand what the best fit is for you, and then pursue opportunities that are going to be fruitful for you. And then this can be thousands of dollars a month. And by the way, our pre-veteran course is just the beginning. It's the beginning of a system where we bring you in and we kind of walk alongside you your last couple years in the military all the way until you get employment, and then we stay with you even then. So when we talk about employment and optimizing that, how many people out there have negotiated a salary that are active duty? I would guess almost no one. And so learning that skill set is extremely valuable, because out of our pre-veteran students who have gone through our salary and benefits course, which is a free part of the system you go into with our course, on average, our graduates coming out of that course have earned an extra $16,500 over their initial offer. So that's a huge ROI right there. That if you don't know how to negotiate salary, you're not going to get any of that. And then if you do know how, then you may be, on average, from our stats and our students, an extra $16,500. So when we say optimize, we're talking about very significant things that are going to impact your financial status getting out. And we want you to get all these things right. And that's why we've set up very deliberately our course as the entry into our overall system, which includes our alumni community. In that alumni community is where we address each of these line items very specifically. And that's going to save you a lot of time and help you make more money. So when we talk about decision making and departing the military, here's why it matters. This is how your brain operates in the background without you realizing it. That your brain generates thoughts which drive behaviors, decisions, and ultimately result in the outcomes that you're going to see. Now, we talked about from the beginning of this presentation the negative outcomes we're seeing in the military population. And just to hone in on that a little bit more, according to the Economic Policy Institute, 1 in 5 veterans, or 1.8 million veterans, are currently making less than $15 an hour. And when looking at the demographic of who these folks are, they found that 2/3 are 40 years or older, and 61% have college experience, and 69% work full-time. So if you look at $15 an hour wage, you're essentially saying that's equivalent to someone who would be just in high school or coming out of high school, who has no background and experience and is purely doing starting off roles. Now, we at PreVeteran don't believe that any veteran should be in that circumstance, because even if you've done 4 years in the military, you've done significant training and built up a significant enough experience that you should be able to put yourself in a better position. So when we talk about negative outcomes, there's also underemployment, which is more common than most folks realize. And according to the Call of Duty Endowment and a study from ZipRecruiter, nearly 1/3 of veterans are underemployed. So again, this isn't to scare folks, but just to let you know that there are serious issues out there that we do need to address, and we need to address it differently, or else we're going to keep getting the same outcomes. So we think the key to this entire thing is mindset, and here's why. Going to the right side, you're seeing that outcomes are the result of your thoughts ultimately. And so the way you're thinking is ultimately going to drive outcomes for you. And when you're coming out of the military environment into a new environment, your thinking has challenges when it comes to certain aspects of private sector employment. And we'll get a little bit more into that. So at PreVeteran, we have something we call the brain gap and the military mindset heuristic. And because your brain operates based on long-term memories, we talk about the fact that your brain will go to long-term memories in order to address current challenges. And on the left side here, you're going to see things associated with the brain gap. So if you've had messages playing out in your mind, like I can't see a clear path forward, we saw that in the quiz. Should I do something different? Do I need my PMP 6 Sigma? Should I go back to school? These are all a result of the brain gap, which is to say that you have no long-term memories associated with military transition. And when you have no memories associated with something, what does your brain do? How does it operate? It reaches out into the external environment trying to seek out new information. The problem with that is that if you don't have experience or the context to filter this information, you could actually end up in a scenario where you're accepting anything you see or hear, which will look a lot like spinning your wheels. You'll end up doing a lot of these activities, which I myself did. I found myself with a PMP and looking to get my MBA as I was getting ready to get out. That's before I knew what I was doing. I didn't know why I was doing those activities. It was my brain causing me to spin my wheels, which is not an efficient path. And that's part of what we want to address with our course. On the other side of the memory spectrum is when you have a lot of long-term memories that you think are associated with a current challenge. And how this plays out in your mind is messages like, I can figure this out on my own, a really high level of confidence, even though it's something you've never done. The private sector wants a generalist. As we discussed, that's not true. The private sector is very specific down to the industry, company, and role level, and a very specific set of skills that they want you to have to fulfill that role. I don't need to change. Not true, right? You're going from one environment to another environment. That's going to, by its very nature, necessitate change if you want to successfully operate in that new environment. Things will work out fine. They always have. It may or may not, right? But the data right now is not as good as it should be for veterans, in our opinion. And we think we can turn that around with taking a different approach. So what does this mean for you as an individual? Well, you come out of this system in this current model a bit confused, not knowing which direction to go, as you see the arrows there, missing the target because you don't know actually what the target is. And then you end up doing a lot of work, pushing the boulder up a hill, but it doesn't actually result in any productivity because the work itself isn't the goal, it's the outcome you're trying to get. And oftentimes we end up doing unproductive activities. And then that last one there is you actually take on a lot of risk when you don't go through this process early enough, when you don't go through a transformation as you prepare to get out. You actually end up taking on a lot of risk for you and your family. And so again, honing in on that military mindset heuristic and the long-term memories, these are some of those messages that you're going to see play out in your mind. And if you relate to that, I mean, please give us a thumbs up or a comment, tell us a story, because this I found to be very true. I know in my initial job search, I was putting everything on my resume, every single thing that I had ever done in the military, when only about 10% of what I had done was applicable to that specific role. So again, we need to understand that the private sector is fundamentally different, that going down to the specificity that they want to see is going to be a key to your success. And so we're here to say that you have a choice to make. We see a lot of people like this graphic on the left trying to do it on their own, that, hey, I've done hard things, I got this, I'm very capable, which is true, but they think that they have to do it all by themselves. So as you see this guy lifting the boulder, trying to do it all, you have help out there. There are people who want to help. There are many, many veterans out there who are in the private sector that are now successful that would love to reach back and be able to help you early in the process and help you find something that's going to be a good fit for you and your family. We're one of those options at PreVeteran that we would love to come alongside you and show you a clear path ahead. And we want that decision making to come from you and figuring out what the best fit is and where you want to live. All of those choices, only you can decide what's best for you and your family. But we can give you the context for where you are now and what post-military life looks like, how the private sector operates and functions, and some of those mindset barriers that you may not be aware of. And that's really a powerful thing when you're approaching your transition, because once you have those tools and you build that awareness, we find that veterans far exceed their counterparts in all aspects. But we're here to say that you have a choice to make, right? That if you choose to go it alone, it's going to be difficult. And unfortunately, a lot of those negative outcomes we see are folks who feel they should do it by themselves. There is an easier path. It's not the easy button, but the easier button. And that's the fact that we've spent a lot of time and effort into creating a coursework and an entire system where we stand alongside you for your last couple of years. And we really walk with you as you get ready for your employment. So this is what that looks like. And here's our system. You'll notice that we elongated that individual development period. Like I mentioned, 1 to 3 years before you get out is really a sweet spot for us that we find is early enough to not be in crisis mode. It's early enough to do the transformation that you actually need as you're preparing for private sector employment. So big announcement, big hand wave here. Our next course is October 9th. It is starting very soon. Our cohort is filling up. So if you want to join our course, I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat for our website and how you can join that next course that we have coming up in October. But that course, like I said, is just the beginning. It's just the entryway into our entire system, right? And for a one-time cost that we charge up front, you get entry actually into our employment prep course, the 5-week virtual course, where we meet once a week throughout the course, and we walk alongside you through that transformational journey. And then you flow into our pre-veteran alumni community. Within that community, we do a whole lot more, and that's really where the value is within this system. And so that's social connection, that's connecting with other veterans who are already in industry, and that's doing a whole lot of training on how do I do my VA claim? What does that look like? When should I start? What do I need for private insurance, and how should I start that process? When should I do that? Financial readiness. Every aspect that you can think of, we have covered in that community. We host live events, and this is all just free, and it's part of what we do at PreVeteran, part of our system, is to have this alumni community where you can all gather around the shared experience that you all went through the course together, and now you're in the alumni community. And it's just an awesome place where we're seeing a lot of transformation, and we're seeing people really succeed in their role outside the military. So when we talk about our pre-veteran system, that's what it looks like. And within that alumni community too is where the salary and benefits course takes place. So once you're approaching that hiring window, we recommend you go through that course. It's free in the community. And that will help you negotiate a much higher salary in your first post-military role, which in itself has huge value. So this is the goal, right? That we want you to have better relationships, better mental health. We want you to enjoy your last few years. And we can do that by addressing each of these line items, which all together can be overwhelming and stressful. They can eat up your entire last year of military service. Instead, if you come to subject matter experts who we have in the community, they can walk you through each of these things in a much more efficient way, and provide you free information for how to do that. Extremely valuable. So here's our employment prep course. Again, 5-week course, very deliberately created and designed. We've done it over 2 years now, over 100 folks going through it with a lot of success stories. You can see the testimonials on our website. So we do have a weekly live Zoom on the Thursday evening during the course, and that's just to answer questions, go over the week's material, and connect as a cohort. So in week 1, again, we address that communication gap, get you tech ready for your transition, and introduce you to your people resource. In week 2, we get you to think a little bit differently, understand some of your internal barriers to your transition that you may not be aware of. In week 3, we get you aligned to the private sector by understanding the nuance of how they operate, how they're organized, how they make money. And then in weeks 4 and 5, we have you do a capstone project and iterate that project by exploring different career opportunities within a very deliberate framework that we've created. And throughout this process, you're given a workbook that you can document each of these actions as you're going through it. So at PreVeteran, we believe in teaching you and then having you go do to reinforce that learning. And again, we're interacting with you throughout the process to make sure that you're getting huge value out of this. And then again, our salary negotiation course is in 5 modules. This is not done in a cohort. This is done on your own timeline. It's a totally standalone course, self-paced, and we have office hours to address any questions as you navigate that. It is hosted in our pre-veteran alumni community. But within this course, we teach you how really to walk through the interview process, understand the concepts behind how HR packages are actually formed and created so that you can negotiate against them using the same techniques that they use to create and form the actual offer. So once you understand the process, it's very straightforward, and you'll understand how to negotiate and then accept or reject the offer. So within that kind of wraps up this presentation, we want you to know that we have some great offers for you for listening to this. 10% off. Regularly, it's $9.99 to get into our system, but with that 10% off, just $900 to get into our entire system. That includes the employment prep course, the salary and benefits course, into that pre-veteran alumni community, all for a single payment. And you can do a payment plan too, where it's broken up. We do offer a money back guarantee. So anyone that goes through the course feels that they didn't get the value that they were hoping for can just ask for their money back, and we will refund you, no questions asked. And then we do advocate for spouses to be part of this process, right? Extremely important that they are part of this too. So we have you, when you join the course, your spouse or significant other will get a separate login for free, and they'll go alongside you throughout the course. So we love to see spouses in there as well. So that really wraps up my presentation today. Again, the links are in the comments. We hope you check those out. If you have any questions or you're watching this after the fact, please post in the comments. I will respond there, and I'll be happy to interact and connect with you one-on-one as well. So that's it. Again, this is Aaron with PreVeteran. We'd love to see you in our October course if you'd like to join us. Also, if you're just preparing for your military transition, have some uncertainty, we'd like to talk to you offline. So that is all I got for today. I'm going to close this out, and I hope you guys have a fantastic Tuesday. We'll see you next time.